Hello everyone, this is FIDE Viktor Neustroev. Today we do a very specific workshop. It's called the pawn wedge in the center. I don't know if you are familiar with this terminology, but this means a pawn into the enemy territory supported by your pawns, one or two. Okay, so people are joining. This is great. That's why let's start. So first of all, what you have to remember, you definitely, well, if not always, but from time to time, you have to play this position with a pawn wedge. It's a very important strategic approach in many different openings, especially in King's Indian. What does this move do? For example, well, let me explain what I'm talking about. Let me play d5 move on the board and talk a little bit more. So the d5, this pawn move, is actually called a wedge. What this move allows you to do? Definitely gain space. Sometimes it allows you to turn enemy pieces out of the place of action, either one piece or several pieces. It allows you to initiate an attack on one of the sides. So it can be an attack on the king side if you're not castled, or it can be an attack on the queen side, which is supported with c5 and then a play through the c file. So what disadvantages this move has? With such a pawn move, you define the position, which probably means that you allow your opponent to have some counterplay on one of the sides. And if it is a pawn wedge, it means that your pieces cannot use such a square. So your invasion, if it was possible before, this time is a more difficult task. When doing a pawn wedge is the most effective. It is effective when you make the enemy pieces bad. For example, by doing d5, you make the enemy bishop bad because it cannot get better. So that's why in King's Indian, and this is actually King's Indian, people here play like f5, then f4, g5, and g4, trying to initiate the attack. But the position of the bishop is still really bad, and they use this bishop on a fate. However, the bishop is used mainly to protect the pawn on d6 and prevent a counterplay with c5. So the bishop is not doing anything except just one defensive feature, defending the pawn on d6. So if you make enemy pieces bad, then doing such a pawn wedge makes a lot of sense. What else? So you can also combine this with some ideas of doing g4, which means that you limit the king side play too. And your opponent has to focus on the queen side. For example, if you have more pieces on the queen side, it's likely to favor you because you are going to play on the side that you want, and your opponent doesn't have any counterplay on the other side. What else? Well, yeah, this move makes a kind of a positional grip. Sometimes when your opponent doesn't have a counterplay. What else? You should also think about trading of your pieces which are blocked because of such a pawn structure change. For example, the bishop on c4, f1 becomes not a super bishop, and if, for example, you could have a chance to trade it first and then do a pawn wedge, that would be better. What do people have to do when they fight against the pawn wedge? For example, what black has to do in this position? Exchange their passive pieces. For example, this passive bishop. What else they can do? Attack on one of the sides. So, for example, if the king was castle, f5, f4 is definitely a possible strategy. Sometimes it can be a piece sacrifice for one of two central pawns, or just a move that undermines. I see, for example, the c6 move, which allows to open the position a little. Yes, exactly. Yeah, well, a5, c5, knight c5 allows to, well, what does it allow to do? Just to set the knight to a better position, but then you have to be aware of bishop takes c5. That's why before playing knight c5, it does make sense to play b6 to capture on c5 with the b pawn, not to develop the light squared bishop. The light squared bishop is okay. Okay, fine. So d5 was played. Let's now talk about this concrete example. So we pushed the central pawn, we fixed the pawn structure, and this is the pawn wedge. And from this moment, the play shifts to the flanks, either the king side or the queen side. Because white is not castled, they can definitely play on the king side too, because we all know that this is King's Indian, and in the King's Indian, black wants to play on the king side. If we want to prevent their counterplay, it does make sense to castle to the opposite side, or even leave the king in the center, but execute an attack on the king side ourselves by doing a pawn march with g4. So a5 was played. Like Brian said, not the very best move. Probably it was already better to start this feature with a5. But okay, a5. I would, if I were white, I would definitely consider g4. That would kill a counterplay. Now there is no knight h5. Knight e8 still can be played, but then f5 only opens the g file and allows white to attack on the g. For example, b6, this. Well, knight e8, f5 seems too slow, but h4 and h5 at the very next move looks reasonable. I can always castle to the queen side if only I see that this is the right moment to evacuate the king from the center to the king to the queen side. The game continued with knight f2. Again, not the very best move, but definitely part of the plan. Yeah, that's why he replaces. The knight is misplaced on h3. b6, queen d2. Again, doing this move could make a lot of sense. However, what do you think black prepared for the g4 move? Okay, sorry about that. I was disconnected for a while. Let's continue. So John, for example, expects black to play h5 with their pawn. And in which scenario? Before that? Okay, now you can see the screen. Yeah. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree with you. This is exactly what black wanted, this, because it improves the bishop. For example, queen f4, now knight e5, f5 can be played, the f3 pawn is the object of the attack. Yes, the bishop is open too. I'm not saying that we should take, but controlling these two squares. So, however, if this move was played, I think that white should continue with h4 and take this bishop much later, or even not take at all, but trade it. I mean, the knight on f4, not the bishop, of course. So knight h4 still could make sense, but knight c5 was played. Looks like black plays like it is a template. a5, okay, then he remembers that it's better to have the pawn on b6, because distracting the d pawn from the center isn't a good idea. So he plays b6 and then he plays knight c5. Looks like he's not really thinking about what's going on the board, and that this is a completely different strategy. It's not a classical way to play against King's Indian. Again, what white should do? g4, absolutely right. So yeah, well, you see, so Brian is very experienced playing against King's Indian, so he definitely sees that g4 is the best move. And then h4, and h5. If h5, then you can probably play this move, and then you can take to open the G file. But if you start with h4, then h5 may happen. Exactly what John told us, that after h5, doing g4 becomes difficult. Now it is a pawn sacrifice. It's still a promising pawn sacrifice, because you can later continue with h5, or you first do this move and then you play g4. As for the game, it was Aaron Nimzo-Indian playing against Savelli Tartakova. He played bishop g5 here. The game continued with bishop d7. Why this move? Well, it's hard to suggest a good move for black, but with this move they at least threaten to play a4 at a certain moment. g4, and black pieces are passive. What do you think black should do in this position? Well, h6 is not an exchange, it's a pawn sacrifice. Aha, so rook c8, c6. Well, in order to play c6, you don't need rook c8. And also my recommendations to all positions and all chess players, if you see that you can do something without preparation, you'd better do it right away. Because if you play rook c8, maybe it will be too late. Or your opponent prepares for your counter play. Here c6. Yeah, c6. White still does the attack, but c takes d5, c takes d5, queen c8. Now what? Well, h5 definitely possible, but maybe first it does make sense to castle. But if we castle, there is also knight a4, and there is a kind of hook on c3. They threaten to take, and if they trade queens, then there is no attack on the king side. So probably we have to continue with h5, and well, again, it's not so obvious. Maybe they continue with b5 and b4. Because h5 at the moment is not threatening with anything. This pawn takes. Bishop h6, fine, but they bring the rook to f7. Okay. So, okay, fine. Then they have to play this move. I don't like it actually, because this and then still g5, it's still a strong attack. Okay, let me see. So bishop h6 first, and then you threaten to take and bring your queen there. What can I do? Okay, I can actually take, and then continue with b4, let's say. Yes, but f takes. Right, but then I play this move, and you can sacrifice, and then you can play g6, but the only thing I see there is a perpetual check. It's a common feature, but usually it works when the second rook can join the attack, or at least the bishop is here. Because this time, well, there is no way to protect the 7th rank. That's why what? H takes, queen takes, and this is just a perpetual check. So knight g4, bishop g4. And they can already bring the rook to defend everything. So that's why it's likely to be a perpetual check only. Right, and this attack on the queen side deserves attention. That was the best counterplay for black here, to undermine this pawn wedge and open the position on the other side. Once black sees that white does the attack on the king side. But they play queen c8 first, h4, and then they played king h8. Of course h5. They even didn't open the position. Moreover, in this position, they played g takes h5, which I think is a very suspicious move. How do we have to react on this move? What do you think? We definitely have a choice, but which move is better? h6, after which you can play g5. So the line Brian suggested looks good. I just, yeah, I think that bishop g7 should be a must in this position. Because what else? Queen d8, then rook h5, attacking h7. Now h7 cannot be protected. So bishop g7 is a must. Queen takes. h6, because what else? h6, g5. G takes h6 is a threat, but what you should understand here is that once you take with the g pawn, the h file becomes closed and your own pawn will be covering the enemy king. However, you will be a pawn up, which is good. So I think white is almost winning here. Probably f5 should be played in this position to get more pieces. So g takes, bishop f6, then queen e8, and well, it's extra pawn. White is better. But you may not play queen h6. You can just capture on h5. Why not? Yes, exactly. Well, now you threaten with queen h6. So bishop move is a must. How to continue then? g5. Knight h3, knight g5. Possible plan. Well, let's say you play knight h3, then it's f6. And okay, let's say you choose a different scenario instead. What else do we have? We can castle to the queen side. And then bring the rook. Then f6, bishop d3, or bishop e2. Bishop e8, rook has to retreat. Then bishop g6 and he defends h7. So your rook dh1 this time doesn't create a threat. Let's now talk about g5. g5 with the idea of doing knight g4 and queen h2, because queen h2 is definitely a good move. How do they play then? Can they continue with f6 still? I think so, right? And then they intend to take with a rook. So it's too late for knight g4 this time. I think so. Take with a bishop first, pawn takes. And then let's decide what is better. This move. And then you probably want to sacrifice exchange here. But let me see. I can also try this here. And yeah, then queen g1. So no, queen h2. Then I do what? I can take there, and after rook h7, I can just continue with king g8. What for? You cannot. So bishop h3, you remember you block, so it's not a disaster at the moment. But queen f4, let's say, and we trade, and if we don't, then I am considering this move. Well, it depends on where the queen moves. So if the queen just moves, I take here. But if the queen moves there, then capturing is a blunder because of bishop f5. Maybe it's still okay. And then it's a perpetual check. Or... oh, this is okay, actually. Wait a sec. I don't have to do it. After queen h1, I can continue with something else. Like, for example, with check, king d1, and trade of the queens. And then the rook is hanging. This is where black is definitely fine. Okay, let's now talk about Dan's and John's idea of doing... No, it was only Dan who suggested it. Doing g6, g5, f6, g6. So you threaten to take. Actually, good point, because I wanted to do this, but now I see that rook h6 and the rook is poisoned. And after king g8, I'm down a pawn, and it seems that the position is winning. Okay, so what else I can do? Yeah, so it should work. Maybe I can do this move. Rook h7, king h8, but how do you save the pawn? Right, right. Let me see. Bishop h3, 7. Well, bishop d7 doesn't work because of what? Bishop takes something like that. Because after knight h6 they have to take, and after the queen comes, it's over. So it should work. And capturing with the queen isn't better because knight g4, knight h6 is coming. Well, it's attacking the queen. You mean well, the idea was to defend the pawn, and then it seems like this is a strong attack. Okay, g6. Okay, maybe I'm wrong with f6. Or maybe actually let me do this feature with my queen, not with a bishop. Now there is no bishop h3, and there is no way to protect the pawn on g6. Yeah, this seems to be the most promising way for black to defend the position. I was very close. Okay. Yeah, bishop e8 didn't work because of bishop h3, but queen e8 works perfectly well. So g5, knight g4 deserves attention, but what I don't like about it, because it defines the position too early, and it seems that white doesn't have advantage there. That's why let's keep the position closed for a while, but still threaten h7. And the move that white played was knight h1. Looks like a mistake, right? Who wants to play such a move? It's not even the edge of the board, it's the corner, it's even worse. However, bringing the queen there and setting the knight on f5 in a close position may work. f6, well, with the idea to use the bishop. Queen h2, h6, knight g3. What's your opinion regarding bishop e8? Well, your rook is under attack. You, of course, can sacrifice it, but do you think it's the best way? Because of knight f5, okay. So castle queen side, and if they take, you take with your queen, threatening with knight f5. But what about this move? I see that there is a strategic advantage, but if only black can parry this attack, the game is likely to end in a draw. Because the black's defensive potential is quite strong. Their pawn structure isn't bad, even if they lose on h6. So that's why it's better to maybe take on h6 or just to retreat. Both options are fine. Let's say this king moves and then knight f5, threatening mate. Queen d7. Still playable, but I don't see anything direct. So that's why I would play bishop rook to h4, allowing this move, and then I would play knight f5. Take, king h7. And can you please come up with a winning plan? There is no need to rush. A sacrifice on h6 doesn't work, at least not now. Okay, so castle queenside. So this castle queenside, bring the rook on h1. Looks like a winning plan. They can probably play this. Rook f7, queen f8 to defend h6. Yeah, maybe, but you have a better way to play. You don't have to play bishop e2. On e2, the bishop is bad. Let's castle. And after, let's say, this move, bring the bishop to g6, and you can take this pawn later. Instead of keeping your bishop restricted, let's improve it to help us to checkmate. You can even bring the rook to h1 and only then take on h6. If you think you need more resources, bring your knight to g4. Like knight d1, knight a3, knight g4, and then take on h6. Fine. So knight g3. Knight g3 was played here instead of... Okay, and king h7. Bishop e2, rook goes to g8. And this is where Nimzo-Indian made a mistake. There was a possible way of how he could tie enemy pieces on the queen side, but continue the attack. So let's decide. This is a very strategic move. Look at this bishop on d7. What the bishop does. Covers f5, right? Also is about to chase our rook away, after which he can go to g6. Okay, so Zamfir suggests to play knight b5. Zamfir, can you please specify your idea? Well, there is also a suggestion of rook f5, according to what I see, but rook f5 works in case if they take. What if they don't? True. What else knight b5 does for the position? True, but what is... Well, you did tell two features, two threats that the knight does, but they are only number 2 and number 3. What is the main one? Yes, so fork is absolutely correct. It forces, it ties the queen down to the c7 pawn, because what else? What else can they use to protect such a pawn? Well, knight a6, then the knight is too passive, and it's actually slow. So knight b5, pinning, tying the queen down to the c7, and if this exchange occurs, then nobody protects f5. I even think that you don't need to take. You can play knight f5 right away, because rook h6 is a mating threat. So that move was necessary, but that wasn't played. Instead, he played king f2. Having in mind that the king is secured on the f file because all white pieces are very close to it. While on the queen side, the king is somewhat alone and can be attacked potentially with c6 and b5. So rook h8. If you decide to triple, it's king g 8, and the h6 pawn is protected. That's why it was played rook h4, and the other rook goes to g1. So you see, it would be really nice to have this knight attacking c7. Bishop f8, just a prophylaxis. What white should do? So looks like the black's position is very defensive. It's not easy to find what to do. My knight f5, and then use the g6 as an outpost. Maybe, but then how to take h6? I would actually do this still. And then queen g6 maybe. Because if bishop is7, then it's knight f6, rook h8, h6 maybe. No, definitely not. Bishop e7 still works. Knight b5 again in this position. Well, knight b5, but this time they have rook c8 at the very least. That's why I don't see this point of moving the knight. So what I would do, I would probably consider this. I don't think they can defend it, so they have to take. Then I take. And then my plan is to bring the knight to g4. First of all, well, which move would you suggest for black to play here? Rook g8? I don't think rook g8 works. Rook g6 is a threat, that's right. So, okay, let's say c6, undermining. Then rook g6 is a threat. This is checkmate, so it's over. Even this doesn't work. That's why it seems that rook g8 is a must. And what should we do here? So this is a possibility, right? Rook h6 first. In this position, rook h6. Why? Okay, so there is a suggestion of doing this move, and then queen g2, but then the king escapes to f7. You can try to continue with this move, but it's too late. Maybe let's start with f4, because it stops the king escaping. So let's say take, knight e4 is a threat. So queen g2, king h7, bishop here, let's say queen e7, queen g6, king h8, but this is not a win. Well, rook f4, but queen g7. So that's why my other suggestion is just to double like that. I want to set my rook there and then simply bring the knight to g4 and take on h6 finally. And I don't think that there is anything that can stop me from doing it. Well, the knight on e6 is captured by the other knight, even if it happens. But true, but you have a strong attack, so do you have to convert your strong attack to a passed pawn? Because for me, right now, the attack looks really strong and more promising than passing the game to the endgame with a passed pawn. Because a passed pawn matters when it is the endgame. If it's the middle game, well, it's important too, but it doesn't play the such a significant role which it does play when the game passes to the end game. So knight d1, knight e3, knight g4. Let me see what can be done. Maybe they play this move. So rook g6. Is there anything that can stop this plan? Queen f8? Okay, let's trade rooks. Then bishop g7. I still want to do this. Queen f8. Knight d1. Yeah, this time they have enough defenders. Okay, so knight f5 plan is promising, but I don't see how it wins. So that's why let's not rush. That's probably the reason which Nimzo had in mind. Knight h5. This move was played a little later. First he played this move, the game continued with knight b7, and then he played knight h5. But knight h5 is always paired with queen g6. After which white continued with this move, and after pawn takes queen f4, doing these attacks. So you can then double the rooks. g4 is protected, e4 is protected, it's fine. So they didn't take. Knight d8 instead, trying to bring the knight to the defense. Bishop f3 is supporting two pawns. Knight f7, knight e2, bishop goes there to support f6. He's not threatening with f5. I don't think it's a good move. But king h1 anyway. Now f5 is a disaster. White doesn't rush. First he secures the king. King goes to g8, and this knight goes to g3 to go to f5. So, and black finds the right plan. They evacuate the king. Knight f5, rook g8, queen d2. So rook goes back, the king is secured. I don't think that all these captures make sense. Well, this capture makes sense, but then pawn takes f5. The g pawn is pinned. The king moves further. What would you suggest for white in this position? It seems white is stuck on the king side. There is no break. Capturing on e5 means knight takes e5. g5 doesn't seem to work. So what else left? Can you continue with... No, g5 definitely doesn't work here. b4 makes sense. Before a5 c5 break on the queen side, right? Knight e7, king e7, f5, and then what? Okay, let's talk about this plan, because with this perfect knight, you take the bishop on e7, which is a strategic mistake, but maybe it has some tactical ideas behind. Then f5. So you close the position. Let's say queen g5. What did you achieve with this? No, not really much, right? And knight sacrifice. Which knight sacrifice? On f6 or what? No, also it doesn't seem to work. I just don't see what to continue after such a sacrifice. So b4 makes sense, or even b3 with a3 and b4 idea. Because if you start with a3, it's a4. That's why b3 first, king moves, then a3. Rook e8, preparing to open the position, but no rush. And that was the last blunder. So the game would continue with b4 at the next move. I think they would start first with this, then rook a2, and then b4. That is the plan, to invade through the queen side and maybe even doing c5 in future to open the position more. But after bishop f8, they lost. So what do you think? How black lost the game here? What did happen? Any suggestion? G5 looks good. Knight h4. Yeah, knight h4. Knight h4, but not with the idea of f5. The bishop just moved away. The pawn is lost. They moved queen h7, which is the only square, and knight f6 is a fork. So he simply blundered exchange. And then g5 was played. And then white easily wins. This is a passed pawn, and white already has extra material. Now, if something like that, g takes h6 with a tempo, queen takes f4. g6, g7 is a plan. Yeah, g6 actually looks good too. Knight e5. And queen f4. This is a winning position too. Okay, fine. So this is how the game ended. But actually, white didn't need to do all these moves with their king and continue the attack, if only at a certain moment he played knight b5, the queen would be tied down to the c7 pawn, and he could win the game much faster. For example, knight b5, let's say rook h8. And then and then you can castle and bring the rook there. So even if they play king g8, it's still a winning position. How can you play? Well, I think this works this time. Take, then you can occupy the g6 square, then you are threatening to take there, but the queen has to defend c7. What does it tell us? What this game illustrates? The game illustrates that doing such a pawn wedge with d5 closes the position and allows us to play on that side of the board where we are likely to have more space. Typically, with such a pawn structure, we are trying to do b4 and then play c5. In this type of the position, playing on the queen side, because the pawn is on d5 and we can expand space on the queen side. But because the king is not castled yet, it does make sense to play g4 and stop a counterplay of black, because they cannot do much on the queen side. So they are restricted on both sides once we play g4. This is what you can learn. Once you do a pawn wedge, once you get a close position, stop the counterplay from your opponent with g4 or something like that, and do what you want. Either switch to the queen side or continue attacking on the king side. Of course, this time, when your opponent doesn't have space to regroup his pieces, continuing the attack on the king side is more promising. Fine. Now let's continue with the next example. d5 was played in this position. Again, this is not King's Indian. The bishop is not on g7. So knight c5 was played, but it was the same type of the position. f3, a5. Look again at this pawn structure. Bishop a3, bishop a7, queen d2. So white sized space, and what white needs to know is which side black decides to castle. They castle king side, and now the plan is clear, a pawn storm, which you should start with g4 move, not with h4 move, because h4 means h5, and now it's harder for you. How do you play g4 then? Well, it's much harder now. You have to prepare, well, maybe knight h3, knight f2, bishop e2, and then g4. But how many... g5, yeah, it can, but without other pieces, it's not creating any threats. So it's much harder, and it requires several tempi. No, let me see what the engine says here. Yeah, h4 still works. It's not the best move. g4 is the best move. A castle queenside and then g4. But for h4 and h5, you have to play a slow strategy. You have to castle. Let's say bishop d7. So there is no immediate attack. You take there. This is what the engine suggests. or you first play king b1. So it's more about a positional play. The g5 is weak, and yes, you can set your knight there, which improves your position from a strategic point of view. But how do you win then? Doing g4 is more simple. The game continued with knight e8. So with such a move, black tried to blockade the dark squares. Well, if you were white, which move would you play here? And bishop h4? It's a check. Well, if you castle queenside, they can already play bishop h4 and block your h-pawn mechanically. You can continue with this and then maybe improve your pieces like that, but, well, your attack is stopped. Okay, there is a nice suggestion that you can try g5 first. What I don't like about it is f6 or f5. I think f5 actually, because f5 means f4. No, g6, h takes g6. So, and then you can hardly undermine. If you could quickly play rook g1, I think it would deserve attention. But this time, what you can do? You can play queen g2, but then f4, bishop moves. Then g5, or just g5 right away even. Okay, so you have to prepare it. But in the game, h4 was played, and that was actually a very nice idea, because this move seriously opens this file, even if this is a check. So king moves to there, and you threaten with g5, which traps the bishop. For example, if they retreat back, then queen h2. Now what? This is hanging. Knight f6 means g5. If h6, what would you do? Bishop h6, right. So this is winning. No, you don't need it. Queen h8. So that's why after king d1, g5 is a must. Kind of a move that cements the position. King c2, queen h2, and then you bring the knight and play this position. So well, the knight can go to f5, but not now. You are still down a pawn, but at a certain moment you're ready to take and then checkmate with queen h7. Right now there is a knight, you cannot do it. So probably what I would do is not just bishop e2, or even bishop d3 with queen d2 ideas. Okay, anyway, looks quite promising and playable. Also, bringing the knight to attack this pawn is a good plan, but then h6 will be played. Well, the bishop is not doing much, and opening the h file leads to serious problems. That's why such a pawn sacrifice worked. c6 was played in the game, and actually this is a natural move. This is how black typically plays to undermine this pawn wedge. Let's decide, do we have to take or not? And in which situations taking is a good idea, in which not? Well, and in which situations we do have to take, or at least taking is favorable? Well, no, well, of course, your opponent won't blunder a pawn. You shouldn't expect that b6 is played, then this. Well, okay, let me show this scenario. For example, castle b6, this queen c7, and then you play knight d5, and it works perfectly well. The pawn becomes poisoned, and they lose everything. No, of course, you shouldn't expect it. If we plan to attack the backward pawn on d6, then doing such a strategy is a good idea. So if d6 is the really object of the attack, then we should do so. I think that there is an example of my game that I played against Volodar Murzin a while ago, and I did demonstrate it at the webinars. Well, I took, and later I played c5 to double his pawns and attack them. And it wasn't the best way to play against such a pawn structure, but it was definitely a possible way. So if d6 is the object of the attack and you can take advantage of such a pawn structure, then it does make sense to take. Otherwise, no. Here, because you have potential of the kingside attack, you definitely should keep the pawn structure as it is. So castle, c takes d5, and what is better? This, or this? So c takes opens the c file, but keeps the position closed and allows you to continue the attack. Okay, so I'm not sure about this concrete situation, but in many positions it's true. For this exact one, I don't know, because there is already a knight there, so let's say they support it. You are very unlikely to advance the pawns from your king a3 before, and that's why the counterplay is limited, while they can definitely prepare it. And if they want, they can even consider doing b5 and then b4. So that's why, well, for this example, having the C file for white open doesn't provide any benefits that we can take advantage of right away. But in other positions, maybe. But if it was semish with the bishop here, so taking with the C is a common strategy there. What is the downside to knight d5? Actually, knight d5 is the best move. Why in this position it's the best move? Because here with knight d5 we can combine two ideas. One is to keep the position closed and still to attack. The other one to attack the pawn on d6. If we become unsuccessful with our kingside attack, then we can focus on the weakness on d6. What I also like about such a move is that we keep the pawn on c4, which means that it's very hard for them to play b5 and open the king's position. So when knight takes, the king is safer compared to the line when pawn takes. This move was played. So bishop e6, take, and bishop d5. Now let's decide what is better. Again, you have a choice, queen and two pawns. E takes d5. Well, actually, here, if you say e takes d5 or if you say c takes d5, in both cases you are absolutely right. It's just a matter of taste. The game continued with this move. If you did that, c takes d5, queen b6, let's say, just knight g3, and they struggle with a counter attack. Well, this, but the king moves. Knight a4, well, no, actually it's pinned. Here, black struggles with the counterplay while we have all these options available. Taking with the e-pawn was played in the game. Taking with the queen, I don't really like it. Why? Because this time the queen becomes the object of the attack, so they can quickly improve their knight at the very least. It's still a weakness, but their knight is definitely better placed. So partially it compensates a weakness. So e takes. Let me explain what idea White had in mind here. So he actually wanted to use the e4 square. He wanted to let pieces to go through the center and still do the attack. a4, knight c3, queen a5. Now some defensive actions are required because the attack looks promising. Knight b3 becomes a threat. A takes, queen a1, knight b1, and then who knows what happens. Maybe it's still fine for white, but it looks risky. Also, it can be a3, b3, and knight b3. Pawn takes after a2. It's not possible to stop such a pawn, and white has to sacrifice a knight. So I can show you. For example, let's say just what move? Let's say this move: a3, b3 takes. Pawn takes, a2, a1 is coming, so you have to sacrifice the knight. After which it's queen a2. And to defend the king's position, it seems that we have to trade queens. And, well, then it's no longer promising. I'm not saying it's bad. White still has a very good pawn structure, 2 bishops, but it's not as good as it was before. That's why instead of allowing a3, well, of course, we cannot play a3 ourselves. It was knight b5, trading queens. So the attack on the king side doesn't seem to be successful. That's why knight b5 was played. And in case if the queen's trade occurred, the endgame looks quite favorable. Well, I took with the king, but taking with a rook is okay too. So king goes to c3. There will be this, then d6 ideas. The pawn on a4 is the object of the attack. Or after this move, you can already play b4 and passant, a takes b3, and it looks okay. The knight will be chased away, after which, because of better pieces, we can fight for the a file. Of course, the bishop has to move first. Anyway, black didn't accept this trade. They moved the queen to b6. Maybe that was a mistake. Okay, let me go back to this scenario. So bishop a3 is a threat, as I said, but Brian says bishop c5 eliminates these threats. Right, but then what? Knight d6 is the next move. Well, you mean trade queens? Queens, then you went first instead of knight b5. Then knight b5, and then yeah, well, in this position, it's quite a strong blockading piece because there is no piece that can attack such a bishop. I see that the bishop is not doing much, but how are you going to win? I'm sure white is better, but is this sufficient to play for a win? Just let's hypothetically imagine that you can achieve almost what you want here. What your winning plan would be? Like bringing the bishop to the enemy camp and trying to attack the pawn on a4. Well, maybe, but what if they play a3, b3? Then this is a pawn on a dark square. The position is more closed. Maybe you first have to fix it. So I think this is more drawish than it was before. So this workshop is streamed on YouTube. Also, there will be a recording of it that I'm going to send tomorrow. So trading the queens was better. Queen b6, queen f2, rook d8. Now a3. So knight b3, just the king moves. Knight c7 was played. What to play now? Let's decide. Okay. Uh-huh. This knight or this knight? And then bishop c5. So then suggest to capture both knights. Okay, so well, this knight is not super good. That's why what white did is they took here first. If queen takes queen, and the knight on c7 is simply lost. That's why pawn has to take. And now instead of trading knights, this knight goes to c3 with a tempo. After which it can potentially go to e4. But what I like about this strategy is that it's still possible to continue the attack. Now h5 or g5 maybe first. Queen c2. We can go knight b4. What do you mean? Knight b5? This is before. What do you mean? E4. Yeah, we can go knight e4. Yeah, good point. Well, you mean in this position to threaten d6? I don't think it's so promising because they can blockade with a bishop. So we will push the pawns, but why you spend the tempo on knight e4? Let's push the pawns right now. We can with queen c2. We can threaten a double attack even. d6. No, they want you play d6. Of course, if you do knight e4, it's bishop d6 or something like that. Maybe knight e8 even to stop you from playing d6. So queen e5, bishop d3, and this is where they decided that it's time to open the position and do this sacrifice. So can you take? Yes, you can. This works, but I think the idea of this move was to initiate the second sacrifice in order to open the bishop. Yeah, but which move do you suggest? Yeah, but it's still this feature. You mean queen c2? Yeah, I didn't notice queen c2. I mean, I did, but in a different position. So yeah, then you threaten to take. Okay, yeah, good point. You don't need to take it. You can play bishop here. And then they take on b5. b5, yes. Then what? Knight takes knight? It's okay. Well, queen c2 is still promising here, but g6, h5 still. And white is... can you repeat again, please? Yeah, we're still attacking the king side. So g6. h5 means bishop g5. So we should be accurate. And knight d4 is coming. This is also what I don't like. So maybe we have to trade. But then we still cannot play h5 and what? Yeah, I don't like it. Bishop... if... here? Why? When? I mean... where does black play bishop a3? Knight takes first. So g6 is played, then I traded. There was no moment to play neither bishop a3 nor knight a3 because queen c2 threatens mate. Okay, so anyway, doesn't look promising if we just take. That's why white continued with queen c2. So they want to have this position. Taking on h7 was promising too. King h8, and then with bishop a4, you have the position open, the d5 is still protected, and this bishop is still restricted. So bishop c4 was played in the game, not the very best move again, but the idea was to win a pawn on a4. Because how to defend this pawn? With this move, no, you cannot because of d6. So the pawn is lost. This is why bishop takes c4 was played, because white, it was Vladimir Makagonov, Actually, it was a famous Soviet master, and a certain opening was named after him. In Queen's Gambit, there is a variation with a name Makagonov-Bondarevsky variation. So he was quite famous. Queen b6. Knight a4, and the position becomes technically winning. Well, let's defend. Bishop d6, and the rest is just pure technique. So still there is an attack. h5, king h8, queen goes to f5 to stop them from playing f5. Queen c8, well, this stops our attack. We can trade the queens, but we are a pawn up, and here white pieces are stronger, especially the knight on e4. And there is also a passed pawn on the a file. So soon black resigned. Okay, so let's take a look at this variation of this line briefly again. So what did happen? d5 was played, g4 was played to stop f5, and white executed the kingside attack right away. It was h4. So well, maybe you can play it yourself. Usually you play it against pure King's Indian when the bishop is on g7. When the bishop is on e7, it's called Old Indian variation. But you may sacrifice a pawn on h4 in order to open the h file and do the attack with your rook and queen. However, again, what did we do? We closed the position, we grabbed space. With g4 we stopped the counterplay, and we were focused on the attack on the king side. Making a counter attack on the queen side was too complicated for black and required a lot of tempi. And even after that, we could provoke an exchange of the queens with a favorable endgame, or we could continue playing our attack. So here, the pawn on a4 is a weakness that was taken, and then the queens were traded, so white passed the game to a winning endgame, I would say. So d5 allowed to grab space, allowed us to attack on the king side, and slowed the counter attack on the queen side. That's why in order to create any threats, black had to spend many tempi. It works against some Sicilians like Dragon. But in Sicilian, the c pawn is exchanged for the d4 pawn, so there is no pawn wedge. It can be a different move order. I mean, from Sicilian, you can get such positions, but if the type of the position changes, it's no longer Sicilian. So yes, so Yugoslav attack or English attack against Dragon or against Nidarf or against Shevinin, it's common, but there is no pawn wedge. That's why these attacks can be counter-attacked. I mean, they can be counter-parried. That's why such openings like Nidarf or Dragon are so popular nowadays. Okay, let's continue. This time we are discussing how to play against the pawn wedge. d5 was played, and this time this pawn wedge wasn't so effective as it was last time. Well, white got space, gained the temper, but what's wrong? Why this time d5 doesn't look so attractive as it was in two previous examples? Well, on f5, of course. Like that. Okay, so based on this conclusion, can you please explain the overall? Yeah, so Okay, can you please figure out some specific feature of the black's position which doesn't make d5 move so effective? Well, e4, f5 would be promising, but d5 not. There are two things, three things I would even say that that may tell us that d5 isn't a good strategy. Okay. Oh, white should be played on the queen side. Okay, it's d5. Okay, so fine. Well, I cannot say that this is the exact explanation. It's just a kind of a feeling, intuition, more intuition. I think that okay, so Dan suggests that the bishop can go to f5. Okay, finally we have some nice statements. Zamfir says that black bishop is better. Good point. So with d5, white blocks their bishop. They make it bad. That's true, absolutely. What else? This is just one thing which is on the surface. There are two other. Oh, okay. John thinks that the knight should be on c3, supporting the structure. Um, well, it seems it's better on c3, but maybe it goes to e3. I don't think it's like so. I don't think it's so. I mean, it doesn't play a significant role here that the knight is on d2. No, okay, let me explain. So one thing is about the bishop. Second thing is that black still has enough space on the king side to play with their pieces. So there is no g4 that stops it. And g4 is unlikely to be played. But there is no dark squared bishop, which is bad when the pawns are on dark squares, when they are blocked like that. So that's why all pieces we have are good pieces. And white makes their bishop bad. If there was a bishop on g7 or e7, that would make a pawn wedge stronger. The dark squared bishops were exchanged on b4, I think. Oh, I mean on d2. Okay, fine. So space on the king side, no dark squared bishops, and a bad bishop on g2. These three factors that may tell us that d5 is not a right strategy here. Knight e7, castle, castle, e4. Looks like white does everything that he needs to do, but knight d7. And the idea of knight d7 is to play f5. This knight may go to c5 too. If let's say rook c1, the knight goes, the pawn goes to f5. This is not a big issue. Knight f6 and we cover e6, and then the pawn on e6 will be lost. So knight e1, knight e1, f5, knight d3, and f4. So black can still do the attack. What do you think is the best strategy for white in this position? Try to guess the next move and explain why this move is good. Okay, so Brian has a nice suggestion of trying g4, supporting it with f3, which makes this bishop absolutely bad, but may slow the attack on the king side, may block the pawn structure. Well, it's definitely possible, but I don't like the bishop's position. John thinks about b4, c5, which is quite common in such positions. Good point. G takes was played in the game. That was a mistake. I will explain why a little later. What else? Okay, this move that I wanted you to find was bishop h3. Why bishop h3? So the bishop may come to e6, or the bishops can be exchanged, and after that you can build this f3 g4. If you can do so, it works really well. Let's say knight g6, bishop checks, king h8, and knight f3. And if now knight f6 to just trade, it's even possible to play knight g5. So you threaten with a fork, and if bishop, well, and also with this. Okay, so bishop h3 was the key move. Even if you just took and somehow you could build f3 g4, that would be nice. G takes f4 was played. Why it is a mistake? Because now this e5 square is vacated for knights. And black takes the control over the dark squares. So knight f3, knight g6. Rook c1, well, one of the ideas of rook c1 is to play c5. That's why either b6 or queen e7 are required. Queen e7 was played in the game. Rook e1, he brings the knight. Knight takes, knight takes knight. Taking with the pawn on e5. Then this knight is not really doing much. It can still go there, but then f3. And rook c2 defending the king side. So taking with a knight is better. Of course, otherwise it's f3 by black. So f3 is needed. b6 stop c5. Then knight takes, well, now you can take with a pawn, but then you have to be aware of c5, because they may take advantage of the weakness on c7 once they open the position. Even if you take with the c pawn, they can still have a chance to invade your camp. That's why taking with the queen. So doing such a blockade on the dark squares allows you to control the game. Queen d2. Well, I wouldn't say so, because their position is still very solid, but they are strategically passive, and black is playing for a win while white cannot. This is absolutely true. Queen c3 was played to get rid of this blockade, and if, let's say, you decide to move the queen with some ideas of doing this, it won't work. e5 just. And bishop h3 doesn't bring any benefits. And black has to decide this, to solve this issue with a pawn on e5, and then maybe rook e8, but then it can be even e6. So that's why it's better to agree to trade the queens, but still manage the blockade here. This endgame, well, roughly it's equal. This bishop is a bad bishop. This is a better one. There is a nice blockade on e5, which allows black to have space on the king side. And because of that, black has a chance to play for a win. But of course, if white plays properly, the game ends in a draw. Let's make a few more moves to illustrate it. So the bishop is really bad. Then rook h5 was played. And step by step, black managed to win. I'm not going to show you the rest of the game. Let's stop here. Well, why this move was played? So the idea is to play rook h4, then to play g5, bring the rook, and at a certain moment make this breakthrough. Well, maybe support it with h5. Just make sure you don't trap your rook on h4. So when you play g4, be ready to capture and release your rook from h4. Or don't even play h5 at all, remaneuver your rook back to g6 and then play h5, then g4, and like that. It's important to not allow your opponent to play c5. That's why you shouldn't let him play b4. So if he does b4, you at least should have some invasion on that side. Well, black, well, it's like very slightly better for black, like maybe -1. Also, definitely not sufficient to play to win the game. But look at the benefits. The king goes to e5, which means that this king is more passive. The king on e5 cannot be attacked, and black at least has a plan. So see with the engine. I did analyze it with the engine. It's like -1 and 2, but maybe it changes to -1. So black is playing for a win, and they later won the game. Oh, again. So what did happen? A pawn wedge happened, but black could successfully play f5 here and f4. White shouldn't take on f4, but they did, vacating the e5 square to set a very nice blockade, and because of this blockade on e5, we can stop a counterplay with c5, with b6 or queen e7, doesn't matter, as well as move our pieces to the king side to potentially attack. White did their best, and at a certain moment they traded queens to secure the king's position. However, black still had some winning chances here because of the weakness on h2, because of more space on the king side. Okay, fine. We have one more example where, well, where again a pawn wedge was played, but this time it was black who did such a pawn wedge. So in this position, bishop b2 and d4 was played. And we are going to continue with it a little later. So let me share with you 3 important things. So first of all, if you enjoy my content, if you enjoy these workshops, there is a button that you can use to send a donation. Let me explain how it works. You click on this button using the link, then you enter the amount you want to donate, click PayPal, it redirects you to your PayPal account. Well, you enter using your details, and then you can send money automatically to my PayPal account. Let me share the link with you. The second option to donate is to use Wise. So just if you have a Wise account, then just use this link, and well, it already shows my name, so you once you enter your account, you will be able to send. Again, it can be any amount. I would appreciate any help. It also helps me to pay for my for the work of my assistants who prepare these games that I choose for you to present at the workshop. What else? I'm glad to finally announce our new cycle of group lessons, Master Game Planning and Chess. So again, like a previous cycle, we have 12 lessons, 12 live lessons devoted to the game planning, and the price is still the same. For now, I'm going to increase it in the last week. So the course starts on September 19. But you have today and the whole week to enroll using this rate, $129 for 12 lessons. This is the plan. This is what we are going to study. I've already prepared some content for the first few lessons, and I'm still working on it. What else? So there are 2 ways. There are installment payments, and you can pay for the full course. If you choose full course, you save a little because it's $49 per month, which means that it's totally $147 for the whole course. But if you pay the whole amount in advance, it's cheaper. What else? Well, 12 lessons. We do classes on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And the duration of the class is approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes. However, often we do it longer, like 1:45 or almost 2 hours. There will be a homework. I don't know if you liked it last time, but I tried to make it more simple. Again, if you for some reason cannot join a live session, there will be a recording of this event. I'm going to send it just after the end of the lesson, together with the homework, together with some PGNs that we, of the positions that we analyzed, with, of course, well annotated, and also there can be some presentations with statements that we were discussing at the event. So even if you miss, don't worry, you still have the recording that you can watch later. And the group is small. So there are usually from 6 to 10 participants. That's why it's quite comfortable to learn in such a group. So the link is sent. You are welcome. This is a series of group classes. However, let's continue with our workshop. And the next workshop will be next Sunday. If you are interested. So d4 was played, and the black's position here is better, for sure. Why? Well, they blocked our bishop. They have more space. This bishop is a good bishop, right? But it seems that this is the only benefit of the white's position. Well, we need to develop the knight on b1. They can fight for the center. They can even consider doing e4 at a certain moment. What do you think our strategy here should be as white? Knight bd2, and then what? Okay, so, well, undermining the base. But I don't see the point of queen c2. Okay, let's talk about b4. Well, of course, now b4 is just a blunder. You have to play a3, but for a3, they can play a5. A5 weakens the b5 square, but I don't think that white can somehow take advantage of it. So b4 is a common plan in such positions, but it seems that it doesn't work here. Queen c2 connecting the rooks. Knight d2, queen c2, well, fine, but it doesn't change the character of the game, and we still struggle with space. We still don't know what to do with this pawn wedge. I think that here, Dan is correct. He suggested playing e3. I wouldn't rush, and I would first suggest to maybe play this move, knight a3, then knight c2 to add more pressure. Well, of course, black is not going to take on e3 voluntarily. They are likely to improve their position in general and maybe take on e3 once they see that there is a really good moment when the pawn on d3 becomes extremely weak. But e3, this undermining strategy is definitely correct, because it limits the black's opportunities. Instead, white played e4, and this is definitely a mistake. After e5, their position is unpleasant. But it looks like both chess players didn't understand what they were doing. Oh, can you imagine? It was Jose Raul Capablanca playing against Frank Marshall. Well, we may expect Frank Marshall to misunderstand these positions, but Capablanca is a very strong positional player. He should understand that e4 is a mistake. Anyway, maybe he had some ideas in mind, who knows. Frank Marshall took on e3, and it was true. Well, maybe nobody gonna know. Okay. So, and this was a terrible move. Black lost all their advantage. Well, this move is possible if then black can easily take advantage of the weakness on d3. If, let's say, they had already the bishop here and could capture on d3 and win a pawn, then definitely capturing is a good strategy. Or if at least they could increase the pressure on this pawn with major pieces, then yes, it is a good move. But this time, it's definitely a mistake. What black had in mind when capturing? He thought that he may attack there. And after queen e2, he thought that he exchanges bishops, but he doesn't. Of course, exchanging bishops, bringing the queen there. Oh, actually, it still seems risky because it's vulnerable. Okay, I don't know. Maybe he wanted to take with a knight, and then dark squares are exposed here, so who knows. But knight e3, black, white doesn't need to exchange bishops. Queen e5, rook ac1, everything is protected. So then the pawn on e2 is protected. So again, the best strategy was to play knight g5 to put pressure. However, then this and then this or this move to take on f6, and black is still in the trouble. But they played rook d8. So these pieces are not participating in the game, but the rook is active. However, it's not sufficient. White pieces are better coordinated. h3, knight goes there, and simply knight e4. How to play? The game continued with this move, but was this, for example, better? Good point. After queen f3, there is no bishop b2 because queen f7, queen f8 is checkmate. And if the bishop is pinned, then we are taking it many times. So we are likely to do this, take with a queen and threaten checkmate. That's why it's already a mistake. Capturing on d3 is a mistake too. Why? Well, knight f6 simply. G takes, bishop takes. And then you can do the attack. Rook takes, and then you bring the queen here or here. So e5, let's say just back, and bishop f5, for example, knight e5. This is a winning attack. The game continued with this move, but still, knight takes f6, g takes f6, knight takes e5. Well, taking with the pawn allows the queen to enter the enemy camp already. The f7 will be hanging. You could actually, if pawn takes, bishop c6, then check, and then you take on e5 with a winning attack. So queen g7, queen f7 is a threat. That's why knight takes. Well, in this position, there were a lot of good moves, like rook c2, for example. Queen takes, then bishop f5, and then you enter the enemy camp. For example, here it's possible to sacrifice the rook and then checkmate, but this line requires calculations. Instead, bishop f4 was played. Actually, why not? Defending here and attacking there. Bishop d7, rook a1, queen b3, and what do you think? What white should do in this position? Maybe you've seen this position already. If you are doing puzzles, then this could be this position could be there. True. What are these good moves? Uh, Wait, rook h6 you said. What does it mean? Rook f6. Ah. Okay, right. And in addition, yeah, well, bishop e5, bishop h7. Let's first start with bishop h7, but I don't think it matters. Oops. I mean, pawn takes, and then queen h5 with queen f7, and then checkmate. One feature in the game, it was the second one. Rook fb1, not only with a discovered attack, but with a trap of the queen. The queen cannot escape. Well, queen b6, then it is a discovered attack. So they played queen b4, and now that's it. This is a winning position just. So what this game is about. Doing a pawn wedge was a good strategy for black, but exchanging on e3 was a critical mistake, because after that, black struggled with pieces development, but white gets flexible pawns and quick development and also open bishop. That's why even if it wasn't a wedge, keeping the position closed would be still favorable for black. Okay, so let's make a conclusion. When it's favorable for us to do a pawn wedge, when we see that we restrict enemy pieces and don't really make our pieces bad, or we make our pieces bad, but the enemy pieces are even worse. If we want to get more space and we see that the counterplay that our opponent is going to organize on one of the flanks is not sufficient, or we can parry it, for example, effectively with g4, g5, like that. So mainly when we need space, when we need closed character of the position, and when we restrict enemy pieces. These are three factors that can tell us that it's time to do a wedge and hold the pawn there. And we definitely don't do so if we improve enemy pieces or make our pieces much worse and do not get benefits. Instead, you'd better keep tension in the center and don't exchange or don't push your pawn forward. Okay, fine. Thank you for your attention. The next webinar will be, the next workshop will be next Sunday. It won't be London system. It will be about Italian game. I'm going to announce it, and soon my course on Chessable will be released about this bishop g5 variation on in the Italian game. I'm going to show you. London, I think we did cover London system with black pieces, how to play against London. I also have a course on Chessable, how to play against London system. It's actually a very good one. Most lines are covered. And I'm not a fan of London system with white pieces. I'm not going to do such a workshop in the nearest future. With black pieces, maybe, how to play against it, but with white, no. The link to enroll in the group class. Sure. I think I've already sent it, but let me do it once again. The recording, if you register it for this event, the recording will be sent tomorrow. There also will be a post on chess.com in my blog, so you can add me. Well, yes, you can send me a friend request or just subscribe on my account on chess.com. Okay, thanks Brian, thanks Dan. So I'm glad that you enjoyed our group sessions. Yeah, guys, you won't regret. And I also think that there is money back. So if you, for example, attended the first class and you didn't like it, there is money back. Okay, it doesn't well, it should be here. Okay, maybe we will add it later. So if you attended the first class and you didn't like it, you can ask for money back. This time it's 12 weeks. So 12th lesson. And same as it was last time, almost 3 months. The advertisement says 8 weeks. I think okay, it's 12 weeks. It's shown here 12th lesson, but I see there is I don't know what part of HTML code we should improve to make it showing 12 weeks. Anyway, I'll talk to our admin regarding it. Okay, thank you guys, and see you next Sunday. And our workshop starts not next week, but the week after. Our series of group classes starts the week after. Thank you for coming, and I'm glad you enjoy my content. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.